Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk. AI policies. It's not just China in the US. Japan and Korea and Canada too also have development plans of their own. To compare, contrast, and contemplate the future, today we have Dongwoo Kim, project specialist at the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada on technology policy and former Yenching scholar. Later on the show, we'll also be talking about the latest developments in South Korea-Japan policy, implications for China, as well as Canada-China policy. Dongwoo, welcome to China Econ Talk.
Thanks for having me.
So Dongwoo, before we get deep into AI, would you mind explaining a bit about your background and maybe help folks place your accent?
Yeah, so I'm originally from South Korea, as you can tell from my last name, but I grew up in Nicaragua, so I spent close to a decade over there, and then I was in the States for a year, then moved to Canada for my last year of high school. I ended up doing my undergrad and master's in Canada, did a year in China, and came back to Canada. So as of now, I've become a naturalized Canadian citizen. Canada is home for me. Yeah, and I work on Canada-Asia policy research.
I'm a little offended you didn't pick the U.S., but understandable. Canada's a beautiful place.
Oh, it's pretty great.
Where did the China interest fit into all of this?
So actually, like back in undergrad, I tried to stay away from any like Asia-related courses because I didn't want to get pegged as the Asian guy doing research on Asia. But when I started my graduate studies at University of British Columbia, I took a course on global China. So like the implications of rise of China and what that means for Canada and the rest of the world. And, I got hooked and there was an opportunity to go to China through the Yenching program. Luckily, I got in. And as I spent more time in China, I became more interested in it. So I applied for a fellowship here at the Asia Pacific Foundation to do further research on Asia policy. And that's what I've been doing so far. So it kind of happened without intending.
So now's a good time, I think, to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing at the Asia Pacific Foundation, as well as the key research topics in Canada-Asia, Canada-China relations.
The Asia Pacific Foundation was established back in 1984 at a time when China was opening up. And then there was an urgency to understand Japan, which was an economic powerhouse. So we were established in order to, provide analysis about the Asian region to Canadian stakeholders. We just went through a strategic realignment, but the kind of research that we do, we have a research portfolio on trade, investment, and innovation. So we have an investment monitor that analyzes the inflow and outflow of investment from Asia into Canada and vice versa. And we also have a portfolio that looks at Asia competence. So that is knowledge of Asia or training in Asia for young Canadians. And also we do research on sustainability. So one of the projects that our team launched was the EcoCity tracker for China, in which environmental data at the city level was analyzed. And that data is supposed to help Canadian clean tech companies find opportunities in China. So we do a bunch of different things in order to serve as a catalyst for engagement with Asia, like a bridge to Asia for Canadians.
Sounds really cool. I have far too many people based in DC on this show, so great to come at these questions from a different perspective. So AI policy. Why are all the young people who are sort of interested in China researching this thing? Do you think we are at peak AI policy?
What do you think? What's your answer to that? I was wondering.
I don't know. I mean, I think what happens is, it's fun doing things where there aren't people who are 50 years old who can credibly claim to be more authoritative than you. So it's fun to have a potentially new place to carve out. But on the other hand, I think there are lots of other things which are actually more important than AI policy going on today and in the future of U.S.-China relations, but are just sort of like less sexy and aren't creating billion-dollar companies and on the front pages of Wired or whatever. But am I missing something? Should this actually be number one on everyone's research agenda?
I mean, there is a research topic for everyone. I feel like this is certainly an issue that we should pay a lot of attention and provide a better understanding to the public. Because when we talk about artificial intelligence, as you might know, there's a lot of misconception about it. Like people imagine a killer robot, they talk about Terminator. I mean, like if you go to a conference, you're bound to see a Terminator reference at some point. Mm-hmm. But, like that's like strictly speaking, that's like not what we're talking about. We're talking about, algorithms and big data that's allowing us to, make better decisions and automate certain things. But people have such a misunderstanding about this. And then also like the way in which we're using artificial intelligence now, it's kind of subtle, right? It's used by Google, it's used by Facebook, and it's being used in a way that we're not, like if you don't have the tech literacy, you're not always going to be aware of it. So I think there's a potential that if we don't do this public outreach program, educate people about what AI really is and why this matters, then we might get to a situation where people don't really have a clear conception of what this AI thing is when it'll be affecting so many aspects of their lives.
Yeah, I mean that's the argument I think holds the most water, and it's the one that the OpenAI folks make. Basically, that we're at very early stages, and like if bad laws get put in place now, then ramifications will be going on for a while now. But like the status quo has already been set in stuff like military relations or or third country policy or development policy. Other potential areas of research aren't quite as wide open and rife with places to contribute without necessarily having done PhDs in the topic. So with that, let's jump in. So let's start with China. So July 2017, the State Council releases a plan. Dongwoo, what's in it?
It's the plan that gets cited all the time, right? We're talking about the next generation AI development plan. So this is I think it was Matt Sheehan who described it as a big blueprint of things that the government wants to do. They're basically saying these are the things that we want to achieve as a nation when it comes to AI, and here are the things that we have to address. So it talks about talent acquisition, it talks about funding allocation. It also talks about the need to come up with a safety framework for AI, and also the need for China to come up to standardize this form of technology, and talks about the ethical and social implications of the technology. So it's a big document with a lot of things in it.
So next, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology releases their own more operational level report. And what's in that document?
So that talks about more. If the next generation AI plan was a big blueprint, then this one is a more customized, more specific list of demands. It outlines guidelines for the industry, government, and other stakeholders, but within the time span of 2018 and 2020. So, it highlights the importance of supporting research and entrepreneurship, and then establishing a foundation for AI-led industry.
So what strikes out to you about the way that the Chinese government is going about forming AI policy?
So what I find really interesting about it is that it's not a deviation. This is what the Chinese government has been doing, in terms of their economic development policy. And I feel like it's a continuation, but it works well with AI. It works well given, how big the Chinese market is right now. That's what I find fascinating about the Chinese plan.
Why so?
Because we're talking about artificial intelligence as if it's artificial intelligence policy as this is a whole new thing, and then the Chinese are doing this thing, and then we're going gaga over here. But then really this is the Chinese government just taking the same approach to governance, to other things that they've worked on before, but to artificial intelligence. What
is it copy pasting from, and why do you think it's a good fit for the AI questions?
From the things that I've read before. The railroad Gaotie. What's that in English?
High speed train.
Yeah, high speed train. But then the Chinese government often talks about how they lifted people out of poverty. That's been done through the state, intervening and then working closely with private sector entities and academics in basically. Not so much a planned economy entirely, but then it works in tandem, in partnership with private sectors in order to catch up to the rest of the world a little faster than a free market would allow them to do.
So next up, we have Japan. So what on earth is Society 5.0?
It's a vision that reflects both social and economic goals for the Japanese government. So, quote unquote, it's Society 5.0 is a human-centered society that balances economic advancement with the solution of social problems by a system that highly integrates cyberspace and physical space. So basically, what they're saying is that the Japanese government they are interested in utilizing artificial intelligence and other forms of emerging technologies in order to not just tackle economic stagnation, which has been the goal that the Abenomics was trying to address, but also to address social issues such as aging population. Like that's one of the big things that gets brought up when Japanese AI policy is talked about.
Was Society 1.0 like Tokugawa Ieyasu? I mean, I don't know how we get all the way to 5. This is what's really puzzling me.
Yeah, so, Society 1.0 was, I believe that it was either farming or hunter-gatherer. And then Society 3.0 was the Industrial Revolution, so the first Industrial Revolution. 4.0 is the Information Society one. And then 5.0 is the one where, like if 4.0 is where people have to work directly with data to make things happen, then 5.0 is where we have artificial intelligence in order to automate that process of fetching data and making things happen.
Like, if only we'll be able to live to see Society 7.0. So Dongwoo, what is the Japanese government doing to push AI forward in Society 5.0?
There are many things to be talked about the Japanese government, because I think they're doing interesting things like domestically and also abroad. But domestically, what they did was, first of all, they created the Strategic Council for AI Technology. So one challenge with artificial intelligence and policy is that it's not a technology that gets siloed in one space. It's not a thing that you can contain, or it's not like
building a rocket engine. Yeah, it's not like a moonshot or something.
No, it's not. And then it gets applied to different sectors of society, right? We're talking about AI plus agriculture, AI plus health. So like for government, if it wants to deal with, to engage with AI, to govern AI, then it has to be done from many different ministries. The Japanese government, by creating the Strategic Council, it created a control tower where like policies as it relates to artificial intelligence, they would be able to coordinate and work a little more effectively. And I think that means a lot, considering that within many governments, bureaucrats don't necessarily understand the technology. And having a centralized agency or a centralized entity that deals with the technology will allow them to gain competence and be able to be more proficient.
Sure. So what else is going on in Japan with respect to AI?
Yeah. So like the Strategic Council came up with, developed the Artificial Intelligence Technology Strategy in 2017. So they basically created a roadmap for creating the foundation for an AI-based industry. So for Japan, like they talk about addressing social issues and economic issues, but one big target is to upgrade its manufacturing sector, because Japan is competitive in the sector, but they want to ensure that they maintain this competitiveness, especially by combining AI plus their excellence in robotics to like maintain that edge as a strong manufacturer. Like the strategy that they came up with basically assigned national laboratories, and each ministry would be working with the laboratory and also private sector entities, say Toyota or Mitsubishi, in order to develop and test out these technologies and also coordinate policy along the way.
Seems like there are some commonalities between what Japan and China are up to.
Yeah.
And what about from a talent perspective?
From a talent perspective, okay, so that's the other interesting thing, because both of the two countries, like when you read their strategy documents, they emphasize that they do not have enough talent. And this is the case for most of the countries at this point in time, I think. But they really, really emphasize that they don't have talents to work with AI at many levels, and also that they lack world-leading researchers. And this is, like China and Japan, they're in different situations now, but both of their strategies emphasize the need to invest in training people who would be able to work with this technology, which will, like, according to their plan, will be a key part of their economy.
I showed up in China in June 2017, not knowing much more than Ni Hao. 2 months later, I was HSK 3.5, confidently having hour-long conversations and traveling alone in rural Yunnan. By the time I started my graduate program that fall, I wasn't the foreigner who forced Chinese groups to switch into English. In my program, there were plenty of students who came to China with no Mandarin background, but none of them got to near the Chinese level I did, largely because they didn't have the right environment to invest in the basics. So where did I make all this critical progress? At CLI in Guilin, one of the few places that teaches Chinese right. In 4 hours of daily one-on-one sessions with engaged and flexible teachers, and in an environment that supports immersion outside the classroom. Unlike in Beijing or Shanghai, you'll be forced to use your Chinese in daily life, and won't fall into a friend group of expats. Guilin isn't your average Chinese small city either. As a tourist hub, it's developed enough to provide you with whatever creature comforts you want, from upscale gyms to chill cafes and fancy malls, all while being surrounded by gorgeous mountains and next to no pollution. CLI isn't just for Mandarin beginners, it supports all levels of learning. It's not just for students either. In fact, its median age is 28. To learn more, go to studycli.org and enter offer code ChinaEconTalk for $100 off.
Support for this week's show comes from Brattle Street Educational Counseling. Stressed out about college applications? Brattle Street Educational Counseling can help. They provide guidance throughout the whole process and offer workshops for students looking to work in small groups at a rigorous pace. The workshops include hours of one-on-one attention. From college essays to standardized test prep to interviewing and applications, Brattle Street offers support for any student. Brattle Street, BRATTLE Street.com, helping you get where you want to go.
So now we have South Korea. In 2017, they get their own master plan. So what's in it?
Yeah, and then so they came up with the mid to long-term master plan in preparation for intelligent information society. But that plan,
Korea, it's only 4.0. This is like super lame.
No, that's not iKorea. We'll get to iKorea, but then
okay.
So there was a plan that provided like a 30-year like overview of what the Korean government and industry and academia should be doing on artificial intelligence. But then, as you may know, the government got replaced halfway through 2017. If you remember, President Park was impeached, and a new president came into power, and then.
So the 30-year plan lasted 6 months.
I mean, like the ideas in the plan kind of stayed, but then the ministry changed. It ended up changing its name. So from Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning, it became Ministry of Science and ICT. But like President Moon, looking at what's happening around the world and looking at the Korean economy, like he decided to commit to promoting artificial intelligence research and development and deployment in Korea by creating an organization called the Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
Okay, and what's the importance of that?
So I feel like this is such an interesting body because so this one has 25 members. 5 of them are ministers, like the Japanese strategy, where the council is working as a control tower. The committee has ministers from Ministry of Strategy and Finance, Ministry of Small, Medium Enterprises and Startups, Ministry of Interior and Safety, Ministry of Employment and Labor, and Ministry of Health and Welfare. This committee will bring in these ministers, but also, besides the 5 ministers, the 20 other members are members of civil society and private sector. And it is chaired by a CEO of a computing company. I think this presents an interesting model for governing a technology like artificial intelligence.
So a much higher level of private sector influence and cooperation than what's currently going on in Japan and China?
It's a different dynamic, but it's more out there. Like it's something that the government has been promoting quite overtly. And they're promoting it as, like the South Korea's attempt to develop social consensus on how we should be using technologies like artificial intelligence.
So now let's come to iKorea 4.0.
Yeah, so 4.0 refers to Fourth Industrial Revolution, but also I points to intelligence, innovation, inclusiveness, and interaction. And I feel like the reference to the Fourth Industrial Revolution is is interesting to me because it's a language that is getting used a lot in Asia, like Fourth Industrial Revolution, but not as much as it does out in the West. And when I spoke about this with people in Korea, they were saying, there is an anxiety in Asia about missing out on another industrial revolution. Because in the Asian historiography, the first industrial revolution was the moment when, the West started to move ahead and when Asia started to fall behind. And that led to, like in case of Korea, it led to colonization. For China, 100 years of humiliation. And Japan also has its inferiority complex when it comes to dealing with the world outside of Asia. Like during the World War II period, their whole thing was transcend that kind of inferiority. So there is an element of anxiety about that historical fact that we missed out on the first thing, so we better not miss out on the next one.
Sure. I mean, that's super interesting, but I think also leads into my earlier point about peak AI policy. If we're worried about missing out on the Industrial Revolution because of like one of the many potential of the 20 potential technologies that could change the world over the next 30 years, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not bought in, but the idea that Great Divergence anxieties are feeding into East Asian AI policy, I think is a super fascinating one.
Yeah, and then I was a history major too, and then I have an anxiety about bringing this kind of broad interpretation. But like in my conversations with everyone in China, Japan, and South Korea, the language of catching up just came up over and over again. Like catching up vis-a-vis who? Like, who are we competing against? And then when you look at the Chinese, next generation AI development plan, it talks about becoming number 1. And the South Korean plan talks about becoming number 4. But, seriously, like, what ranking are we talking about? That element of anxiety is definitely there, and an argument could be made.
The whole reason the Great Leap Forward started, right, was because Mao decided that he wanted to catch up to British steel production, and it was this big anxiety from a relative economic standpoint. So to see those sort of like deep psychological worries being played out in 2019 on something that seems pretty emotionless, right? AI policy is super interesting and super depressing, I think.
It is really depressing. And then you know what? And one of the conclusions that I make that I've made through the report is that this is seen as a national project by all of them. Like ultimately, this is seen AI. However, I'm not a person who believes that there like an AI race is a good thing, or that we can objectively like measure a country's AI capacity and compare like next to each other. It's a very different type of technology, but all of these countries, the 3 countries here, they're looking at artificial intelligence as a national project. It's a continuation of development, like the developmental state attitude.
It is a super weird paradigm because, like, at the end of the day, it's not something where you can say, oh, I have like 100 missiles. I have like 100 AIs and China only has 60. So then we're going to have like AI primacy or whatever. I mean, they're just algorithms that you can apply in lots of different situations. And so much of the research is public, and the best research that's going on in the world is in private companies that aren't necessarily connected to governments, and sort of the governments are trying to apply it in their own ways. But the idea that this is, something that people, that the same mindset that's used to like build up steel production or nuclear missile capability is now being thrown into something that has such different dynamics. I'm actually getting more and more convinced that the world does need better AI policy. I think you've turned my head around. If this is if the dynamics of catch up and national competition are so present, maybe we do need more 20 and 30 somethings telling folks that this maybe isn't necessarily the right way to the right path to go down. So let's come now to Canada, a dark horse AI powerhouse, you argue.
Well, that's not the language that I used in my report, but sure, yeah. When it comes to AI, it's a fascinating place.
Is the new OVO album gonna have some AI produced beat or something? I don't know. That's not nice. I love Canada. I really do.
I mean, oh man, this is such an American. You're definitely an American. Yeah. So in all seriousness, Canada is an exciting place for AI because, as you may have heard, there were periods of AI winters where, like AI was seen as a technology that's okay, like it sounds cool in theory, but there's not enough data, and then the computing power. We're not there as to be able to realize these theories of artificial intelligence. So, like AI research funding was getting cut all over the world, and the discipline really suffered. But during that time period, the Canadian government kept investing in this research.
At that time, why did they believe in it, whereas other governments were more quick to pull the plug?
It's not so much that the Canadian government was intent on we're going to capitalize on our research on AI 20 years down the road. It was not so much like that, but it's the funding model for higher education institutes. The government kept providing funding for this research topics that seemed to be a little bit wacky throughout the winter, and that's how people like Richard Sutton, Geoffrey Hinton, or Yoshua Bengio all ended up in Canada and stayed there. Richard Sutton, he's an American. And now he's based at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. And, he's known as one of the founders of reinforcement learning. And, DeepMind, which created AlphaGo, has an office in Edmonton. Have you ever heard of Edmonton before?
Edmonton Oilers. Come on.
Oh yeah, you watch hockey. Okay, yeah. So that's my Canadian hometown. But University of Alberta is ranked number 3 after Tsinghua and Carnegie Mellon on artificial intelligence in the CS rankings. So and people like Richard Sutton is leading the team within that organization. And also, folks like Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, those are them and Yann LeCun, so the Facebook guy. 3 of them just got the Turing Award, which is the Nobel Prize for computing science. And they're seen as the founders, the biggest contributors about deep learning, which is one of the hottest machine learning technologies now. So, because of that early investment, we have all of these world-class, literally world-class researchers here in Canada. And, they keep attracting top students into their programs. So the Canadian government realized that AI could really provide an advantage for the Canadian economy and attract a lot of talented people. So they decided to invest $125 million in a national strategy for AI. Right now, we see not just students coming to Canada, but major companies like Amazon and Google setting up their shops in cities like Edmonton, Montreal, and Toronto. And also at the foundation, we track investment flows from Asia. And we attracted $580 million worth of investments for AI, specifically from companies like Samsung, LG, Didi, Mahindra, and Fujitsu between 2017 and 2018. So this is really becoming an area of interest for Asian investors, and especially combining with the concern over the lack of talent. Asian companies and Asian governments, they're trying to access the talent that they lack by establishing research centers here in Canada.
Sure. Let's now turn to AI principles. And you have a really nice table comparing China, Canada, Japan, and South Korea and what they think about the main sort of ethical questions that come along with the development in AI. What were the similarities and differences that stood out to you over the course of this research?
So, of course, there will be differences in semantics and the details. But my main takeaway is that they all care about pretty much the same thing when it comes to the technology. It's not like the Chinese are not concerned about the potential malicious uses of AI to breach privacy. They do mention that respect for privacy is important. There is a concern for the technology to be used in a responsible way, in a way that benefits people, and that it's centered around well-being of human beings. So words like accountability, responsibility, they all come up. So when it comes to the technology, I would argue that all of the 4 countries, policymakers or people who are involved in this space, they understand that the potential implications of using AI maliciously, and that they all recognize that there is a need for all of us to work together in order to prevent those malicious uses. The difference is then the context in which those ethical principles come into play. So, for example, we should respect privacy. We can agree on that. But what does privacy mean in the Chinese context? And what does privacy mean in, like, say, the Canadian context? One of the most fascinating conversations that I had for this research, I was speaking with a philosopher who specializes on like East-West comparative philosophy. He was saying, in the West, we're freaking out about privacy, but we're just handing out our data to private entities. But like, wouldn't you rather give those to government? If our data goes to someone, then we should give it to somebody that we can trust more. But in case of Asia, then there is more trust with government. But in case of the West, we don't trust the government as much. So the context makes the difference, even though maybe we might be saying the same thing in these ethical guidelines.
So we've had a number of episodes on this show about the U.S.-China technology tensions and competition. I'm curious for your perspective on what the impacts are to these third countries like South Korea, Japan, and Canada that we've been discussing on this episode.
First of all, we need to establish the premise that the trade war, quote unquote, between China and the U.S. is not just trade war, but it's also a political war. It's a tech war. It's an attempt for each country to maintain its edge on its technological superiority, perpetuating that discourse of the AI race, which we agree that's not the best way of framing it. So as I said earlier, this is a national project for Korea and Japan, and also China. And increasingly, given how much of this having talent or having the prestige of being the number one or number four in AI, like how much weight that carries within those national policies, it really suggests that this is becoming a part of international competition. And we see that in the US and China relations as well. Like competition of technological superiority is really highlighted. For Korea and Japan, then they're stuck in a very challenging situation. They're so close to China. When I spoke to people in industry and government in Japan and Korea, they were expressing their anxiety about the rise of the Chinese in general, but also how they would have to compete against them for export, for manufacturing, for their industry. And adding to that is this competition over norms, because China wants to be basically the United States when it comes to internet. They want to set the standards. They want to be able to shape the norms in the international community.
So you've had a number of conversations with folks involved in AI in Japan and South Korea. I'm curious how they, what role U.S.-China or the rise of China plays in their mind as they're thinking about these sorts of issues.
Overall, there's a lot of anxiety in Japan and Korea that I've spoken with. They're concerned about having to compete with the Chinese, and then also they're such a big part of their trade agenda as well. Like especially in case of South Korea and Japan, because of their proximity, they're economically dependent on China. So like the dynamic around the world becomes really interesting because as the U.S. and China is getting, the tension between the two continues to grow. And then also there is the issue of competition over tech. In case of the United States, it has been trying to limit the growth of the Chinese the Chinese tech industry by explicitly banning export of necessary materials to China on the grounds of national security, as we saw with Huawei and ZTE cases.
So, especially I imagine as the tech trade war continues its never-ending grind, Canada continues to look ever better in contrast with what's going on in the U.S. I'm curious if there's been any sort of like ethnic profiling, the sorts of things that you've seen in the U.S. of late, where researchers with an Asian background are feeling less comfortable in their places of work, feeling discriminated against given the current tensions.
So not as overt as in the States. I think if anything, the concerns that have materialized are, if there's a funding within Canadian post-secondary institution that is tied to an American partner, then that may compromise their ability to continue working on that research project for
Interesting.
say a researcher of Chinese ethnicity, but there has been no concrete move to do that here in Canada. And also, but we are hearing some chatters and concerns from anecdotes from post-secondary institutions. So some of the academics are talking. They're talking about, should we continue receiving investment from Huawei? Should we continue working with the Chinese researchers? So those conversations are materializing little by little, but we're not close to how things are in the United States.
Dongwoo Kim, thanks for being a part of China Econ Talk.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
China Econ Talk is edited by Jason McRonald and Kaiser Guo and is a proud member of the Sinica Network from SUP China. For other great shows on China, check out the Caixin Sinica Business Brief, the Pan Daily Tech Buzz China, the New Voices podcast, and of course, the Sinica podcast, now in its 9th year. Until next week.